Hello and welcome everybody to Retake SPL. I'm your host LHS, and today we're talking to PolarBearMike. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing all right. So, didn't think we'd have you on so soon again, but obviously, with what's going on, I kind of have to have you on, and I'm really glad that you agreed to. So, those of you who don't know, and I don't know how you couldn't know, uh, PolarBearMike has left Team ALG. We'll put a link up for the twit longer. There's also the subreddit post, but Mike, why don't you kind of just like walk us through like a TLDR version?
TLDR version would just be I was getting pretty burnt out on the game, and nobody in the team seemed to be like they were having a good time or having fun or really felt comfortable, I guess, in the way the environment was. And obviously, we weren't having the success we wanted to. So, with other real life stuff going on, it seemed logical for me to just step back and try to fix some personal stuff and also hopefully make the team better in the process because everything was going kind of the wrong way.
Yeah, it sounded, between you leaving and then the departure of MLC before this, it sounded like you guys had some of the same points to make. And although, MLC's was a bit more I don't wanna say aggressive in the way that he went about it, but, like, very differently handled. You guys definitely both touched on, like, communication being the biggest thing that Team ALG really was lacking, and I think this split kinda showcased that you guys you just never really found your footing. I mean, the only you guys got the 2-0 what was it, E United, right?
Yeah, it was a United.
And that was when Benji first came on, so that, they were kinda at a sorts a little right there, and then, you know, you guys just didn't look to be on, the best. Like, you didn't be, like, on your A game, and whether that was, from the outside looking in, we couldn't really tell what it was, if it was just nerves, as if it was, not being able to adapt to Season 4, but then reading your twit longer, it really brought into perspective, like, you were putting in the time, and I think everybody could see that. I mean, you were always doing those videos. I mean, I personally, I was hanging out in your streams earlier, listening to all your support build stuff, and then, Weekend's always doing his thing, but then the rest of the teams, you don't really see them doing too much in the public eye.
Well, the thing that was odd is that like MLC's version of everything, like he wasn't wrong about what he said. I've talked to Stealth about this, like one on one, about how he saw like tardiness to scrims and like overall effort and stuff. But from our perspective, I never experienced that because when it was myself, Cyclone, and Oceans jumping from NV to ALG last fall, I never really had problems with them with any of that on NV. Everybody showed up on time, like normal stuff. And the comms back then were like 99% Scaly and myself anyways. So I never really thought like, hey, they're talking less because we were the only ones talking anyways. But I don't know, this split, I think the main reason I left is that like I tried pretty hard to word it correctly because sometimes it's hard to portray like the full timeline because this has been like, 3 or so months in the process. Is that before the season, we were all working like insanely hard, like post worlds and everything, working on season 4 PTS. I think for most of the PTS, it was only us and Luminosity scrimming, and we were scrimming each other, and everybody was really into it. Everybody was, doing a ton, and that's probably when most of the effort that I had came in. But then as the split went on, Met is like extremely busy in real life. He's been, working on his health and everything. He's been making like great progress with that. And Cyclone has school, Met has school, Weekend has, just a ton of stuff. He's getting freaking married. So
Weekend has weekend things, yeah.
yeah, I mean, he's busy 24/7. But yeah, I mean, basically, we all felt like we were in a good spot going into the season. We were really prepared on PTS, and then it felt like we all had these other commitments. And in my case, it wasn't so much commitments as it was just like stuff going wrong that was really affecting me. And then over time, it kind of dwindled, uh, and our I guess overall effort levels and how much we were dedicating to Smite seemed to go down. And we did pick it back up. We had some good team talks and everything. And I think Cyclone's like the most notable person of like he stepped up a ton. Like he was starting to lead a little bit more. He was trying to talk more. But at that point, for me personally, I felt that once we started working on our problems, it was really noticeable that I just wasn't in a good spot myself. Like I didn't feel like I was playing well. I didn't really have the same confidence, and I had like just far less time to be able to put into the game, and I wasn't enjoying the game. So it just felt right for me to step down. And I think it will end up being a good move for them over time. I don't know how they'll do at the Gauntlet, but I think that they'll surprise people.
Yeah, so I know a lot of people when Incon was removed from the team. Oh, the whole controversy,
Oh
whatever
yeah.
have you with that. But a lot of people who were kind of on the side that yeah, Incon probably wasn't the strongest choice there, pointed to the fact that he never queued with his dual lane partner. But then I found it interesting that when you had the twit longer, you also said that you don't think you've ever queued with the dual lane partner. And so that kind of breeds this kind of like this double standard because I feel like the people are much more receptive to you saying that, but then they like went after Incon about it. You know what I mean?
Well, Oceans and I are a little bit different. I think that the reason people said that about Incon and Ven was because they would like stream at the same time, but not like play their roles and play with each other. For me and Oceans, it was like we both had our relationship was a little different because when we first talked to each other and first teamed together, it was like purely just like how we looked at the game and like what how we thought the game should be played and stuff like that. And Oceans and I actually did talk to each other a lot. Like we would DM each other ideas and stuff like that. It's just we each were very particular about how we wanted to actually practice. Oceans prefers to like just play casual games and just like work on one really specific thing by himself so that like he has control of like every other variable, if that makes sense. He doesn't want to play games where they end up being stomps or anything like that. And then I'm more of the I just want to play ranked and like test a bunch of builds and do stuff like that. So we just had different ideas of like how we wanted to play, but it never really was an issue. We talked about it a good bit, especially between season 3 and season 4. We talked about, is this going to be a problem moving forward if we keep playing together that we don't really play with each other? And we had both decided that since we talk a lot about strategies and how we want to play the game and picks and stuff like that, that it really wouldn't be. And I don't think that it ever was. I think the bigger part was that I started to not enjoy the game and I didn't really have anything to pull me away from that. So it wasn't like his fault or anything like that. It was kind of just a me thing, kind of losing enjoyment in the game. And then once my personal grind of the game started going down, then it started really being noticeable.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we have to address with this is that issue of fault because I feel like just the nature of who's on this team with Weekend, he's gonna have the gun pointed at him. Like somehow this is Weekend's fault. That's the meme that's gonna come out of this, whether it's true or not. And we've already seen that with your Reddit. And shortly before this interview, that Twitter post that people are already saying, "Oh, it's Weekend. It had to be him." Like, let's just get this. Bury that hatchet right now. This isn't Weekend's fault, right?
No, not at all. The thing with Weekend is that because he is such a big figure in the streaming community and everything like that, there's it's just going to be such a skewed like public perception. Like everything, it's going to be like all him if the team does well, and if the team does poorly, it's all him again. And just because like he's the person in the public side that you can really talk to, like you can't really blame stuff on Oceans, like even if it was really his fault because he's not a streamer and stuff. So it just brings on same with Incon, like it just brings on a different level of criticism when you're in the public eye like that. But Kurt was really good. He was a good teammate and he did try really hard. Definitely some of the things I talked about that affected me were affecting him as well, and I could tell that. But I think when you have your two like main voices on the team that are the people that like aren't afraid to speak out a little bit more, if those two voices don't see the same thing, which oftentimes we didn't, then it becomes pretty hard on like the rest of the team of well, what do we really prioritize? Like what do we want to try to fix first? Like for example, Weekend would always say he thinks we're all just like making horrible individual decisions, and I'd always be more on the side of like I don't think this call was like the correct one and stuff like that. And when you have those two battling opinions, then it's hard to get things to work out. But it definitely was not Weekend's fault at all.
So, kind of to explore on that. I mean, I'm glad you kind of explored it yourself, but going into like the conflicting opinions, would you say that you had it was more of like the team decisions type of thing, or what
I
was?
think I'm always more of the I don't know what to call it, maybe cerebral is the word, but I'm always more of the like mindset of how we play the game, or like I'll look things at more of the perspective of, oh, we invaded a speed buff and three people died there. Like that's probably just a risky call that we didn't need to make because we already had a lead. Like we could have done this instead. Like that'd be more how I look at it.
Mhm.
And Weekend would be more like, no, if you guys just held your ability for like this one thing, then this guy would have died and then it would have like chain reacted. And often I try to not point towards people making mechanical misplays as much. I mean, in team fights, if you like miss a huge mage ultimate that you normally hit, like cool, that's fine. That's pretty game changing. But I feel like it's easier to replicate good calling consistently than it is to just outplay teams mechanically consistently because you have full control of what calls you make, but I don't think you always have control of just outplaying everybody.
Okay.
Or at least in our case, that's how I felt.
Yeah, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think I would probably fall closer to you and like look at like, okay, well, yeah, I mean, probably some individual stuff was done, but as a whole, what were the team calls being? Because I feel like those are really what gets everybody into positions to make the bad plays on their own. You know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah, that's kinda how I feel as
yeah,
well, but a balance is always what's good, right? Like,
yeah, yeah.
it's always somewhere in the middle, so that was more the problem was that we couldn't meet somewhere in the middle, and that wasn't because we weren't trying to work together. Kurt and I were trying to we would, like, constantly go back and forth, like, we would talk about how much we want the other person to talk or, like, what specific calls we want them to make, but then towards the end, like, once my play started falling off, like, really hard and I, like, could really notice that I was playing extremely poorly, like, once stuff like that happens, you get to the point where it's kind of too big of an issue to get around.
Okay, that's one of the things I also wanted to touch on as well is like looking at Team ALG guys have been the center of attention in one way or another for the past year or so. Guys, the the whole incon and cope moves, those were huge, bringing you in. Then now you guys started off the season. You guys all said like we're all dedicated to one another. We're doing these 1 year contracts. We are dedicated to this.
Mhm.
Here we are at the end of the spring split, going into the land, and it's ALG's in the news once again with you leaving. Is this indicative of something inherent within the team itself? Is this just bad luck? At a certain point, this is a lot of roster turnover and a lot of change all under one banner. And so at one point, you got to look and like, all right, well, what's causing this? Well, you look at everywhere else, and there's not as much going on. So what's what's the deal with
I
ALG? Is
think
it just bad
I
luck?
think this year specifically, like, my thing is just bad luck because in the past, it was probably just, like, not real commitment or, like, too much turnover. This year, we had everything in place to, like, play that whole year out. Like, we got Kabam as a coach who's really close with, well, I mean, he's a great, like, friend to everybody on the team, but he was really, really close with Oceans and Cyclone, so, like, everybody had like good friends on the team that they could all get along with. It just happened to be that like I was the one piece that started drifting away because I had other stuff in my real life go on. Like I had my dog pass, and then I had both my grandparents have their own thing, and then like we're in the process of moving, so there was just like a ton of outside disturbance on me. And then once other stuff started to happen, like it ended up being really unfortunate that I think I had like 2 weeks straight in like the middle of the split where I pretty much only played Smite during scrims, and that was because that's like the only time I had, and that's never a good thing.
Right.
So when stuff like that happens, it's just kind of nothing the rest of the team could do, which is why I ended up stepping down. I'm sure I could have tried to just like bash my head against a brick wall and hope that the way I looked at everything and hope that the like passion and everything had like suddenly come back, and my real life had kind of been more in
But with
control.
that, you're kinda really risking completely burning out, blowing up, and just never being
Yeah,
able to be the
exactly.
same. Yeah, I get
And,
what you're
and
saying.
I think and I think there was also so much damage done to the team atmosphere at that point that it was better to just do this now, because I think now they're probably in a spot where things feel a lot fresher. They get to kind of have their own ideas and like change how they want to do stuff a little bit, and they should be in a better spot moving forward. And I would venture to guess that they will still have a pretty consistent roster. I wouldn't see the three of, certainly I would not see, or the four of Met, Cyclone, Oceans, and Weekend. I definitely would not see that changing for a good bit, and I wouldn't predict that either. And of course, Kabama's coached, so it really was just like a me thing. It wasn't commitment to each other. It was kind of just other stuff influencing me.
Okay, so at this point, we gotta look forward. What's the next step? You know, are you looking to you had mentioned being a coach for somebody. Say, this week somebody's like, "Hey, Mike, we really want you to come be our coach." Would you have interest in that? Are you gonna, take kind of a sabbatical, like a hiatus, a time off, step away from the game as a player and a coach, and kind of like collect yourself, or would you be open to, kind of changing gears and going in that direction in a relatively quick manner?
I think I definitely would be. Well, I'm 100% open to it, because I don't want to completely abandon Smite. I think most of my issues were, as a player, you have to put in a lot more time than coaches do, because coaches, you can afford to just kind of show up to scrims, make sure that you're tracking everything, make sure that you're, watching picks and bans, recording all of that, and just give your input. But when you're a player, I think you have to play a little bit more outside the game, so it's bigger time commitment. And I think I could still handle the coaching time commitment. So if something came up, I would definitely consider it. But for now, I think the plan is going to be wait for the next couple lands, the Gauntlet land, and then the Smite Masters land, and then into the summer split. Maybe I'll find something that comes up. The weird thing is that it sounds kind of awkward to say this, but I'm not like actively looking for something so much as if something comes up or
Hmm.
people offer me something, then I'll definitely consider it. And that's not because I'm like lazy or anything. That's more just because I have like a ton of other stuff I also want to work on, like in real life, such as like, health and stuff like that. So I'm trying to focus my attention onto that. But if something comes up, I'll obviously consider it.
That makes a lot of sense. You don't want to try to like overburden yourself trying to get back in. You don't want to like, you're still kind of feeling burned out, so you don't want to like rush into anything that
Yeah.
you
Like
don't
when the
have
time
to.
is right, then like
Right.
that's when I'll go back in, sort of thing.
So do you think that you are going to try to make your return as a player, or are you kind of hanging that part of Smite up? Like, is this going to be effectively your retirement, or are you just like, no, I'm going to switch gears, collect myself, do coaching, get that experience, kind of get a new perspective, see the game in a different way, and then maybe after that, once I've gotten refreshed, go back into the game?
The thing that kind of, so I sort of treated the announcement as it was my retirement from playing, but it's hard to tell. Like, I definitely don't see myself playing the summer split. Like, a lot of crazy, crazy stuff would have to happen. Like, a bunch of teams would have to make like really sudden roster changes for a spot to even open up that I'd feel comfortable going into. And then, on top of all that, like I'd have to be the person to get the offers. So like you never have control of that type of stuff.
Right.
So for now, I'm planning on it as being like my retirement, and I don't see myself, even if something suddenly came up, I wouldn't see it happening before the fall split. Certainly, I maybe season 5 if everything like starts to like get into a more controlled spot. But that's so far out, I don't even want to predict that. So for now, I would just assume that I'm done as a player.
Well, I think you have like 4 or 5 days. You can get one of your application into the caster. You could try to switch careers up real nice. Take
I was thinking about that, and I'm not sure, because I did it at I think at every LAN that I've been to or like qualified for or whatever, I've done some sort of casting or an analysis type stuff with the high res crew, except for Worlds, and I've had a blast doing it every single time. So I was thinking about that, but I don't know if I'd be the best person for that competition because I haven't casted in forever.
I mean,
I,
it's
I think I could do the like analysis stuff like
mhm.
on the desk between games, but I don't know if I'm suited to be a caster.
That's only one way to find out. You know, we've got Freight. Now we can add you to the roster. Anything is possible. And so I mean, I know you talked about being being the coach, and said that you really enjoy the casting. You do have an open invitation. I posted this on Twitter. If you want to come on the show, if you want to work with us, we'll make a segment just for you, Mike.
I read that. I appreciate that.
We already have, Freight's fantasy picks, but he kind of sucks at the fantasy picks part. So, we'll let you use our platform as you're kind of like, this is why you should hire me as a coach. I can see these matchups and everything. We'll have you as our special guest commentator every week for the matchups. That's an open invitation.
I appreciate that. I'll let you know.
All right, uh, so let's talk a little bit about the LAN and the Gauntlet and all that. We'll put on your coaching hat and we'll test you out. So with the Gauntlet coming up, I've talked to a couple people. I've talked to Makey from E United. They're going to be the #1 seed in the Gauntlet, and I talked to him about who he feels like the biggest threat is. Looking at the Gauntlet, who do you think is the biggest threat to the established SPL teams? Like, who do you think is the biggest threat to come out of the Gauntlet into the Smite Master bracket?
So for NA, right? Like, who of the NA Gauntlet is the biggest threat to like Luminosity and Eager, that sort of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think E United is the obvious one because they're a #1 seed. They
Mhm.
all in the Gauntlet. They always play really well on LAN, and I think with the addition of Benji, I think the factor of that most people slept on is that historically Benji has played insanely well on LAN, like from Old Enemy in season 2, and also under Flashpoint and Denial back in season 3 in the fall. He played really, really well at all of those lands, and he always has a few games each land set where he hard carries. For example, the game 1 versus Eager at regionals, the only game that Flashpoint took off them in that set was because Benji soloed Divios and got like insanely far ahead and then just hard carried the game.
Mhm.
So because of that, I think that they have a lot of potential to be really good players on LAN. Everybody is proven on a LAN setting, so they're the obvious threat. I think the other one, it kind of feels bad to go by seeding, but I think the other one is Soar, who is the 4th overall seed, and I think that's because lately they've been on more of a roll, and I think they're just hitting their groove at the right time, kind of that sort of thing, and they seem like they're really comfortable with how they want to play with FinoK as their new solo laner. So that was a pretty weird situation where Benji goes from Soar to E United, and it ends up being an improvement for both teams, I think, overall. So I really want to see that matchup. I hope those two play each other.
Now, talking about Final K, do you feel like, once he joined the team, that was kind of the turnaround point for Sora? Do you think it was him specifically that kind of was the rallying point, his play? Or do you think it was just like everything kind of started to click? You know, they did have a really, really tough beginning to their schedule. And after that, they kind of like things backed off a little
Right.
bit. So was it more that they were a good team to start with? They just, couldn't get a break? Or was Final K kind of like the catalyst is like, all right, he was the missing piece they needed?
I think it was a little bit of both. So I think they definitely were starting to click a little bit more, and they were better than their record showed. I mean, they were 0-6, so it's pretty hard to not be better than your record shows at that point.
Yeah.
But they were definitely better, and they had played the top 2 teams their first 2 sets in LG and Eager. So I think things were finally starting to click before they got Fine OK a little bit more, because from what I heard from like scrim performance and stuff, they were starting to be a little bit better. And then once Fine OK came in, I think that his god pool and the way he wanted to play Soul Lane fit the team better than the way Benji did, because Benji can be a carry player, so he's going to treat his matchups like that. He's going to want aggressive winning matchups that he can really dominate his lane with. But Fine OK, being a little bit more inexperienced, kind of came in and just bites the bullet and just plays gods that are going to lose the lane, but to be really good in team fights, like playing Terra, stuff like that.
Hmm.
And it seemed like it was really good for that team's play style, because now you put Homie Faye in a position where he gets to be the carry, and Homie's definitely a jungler who, if he gets ahead, can carry a game. Same with Vedium. They treat him more of a carry, and it's not so much focus onto that soul lane. It's more about using the soul laner to kind of help the rest of the match. And they seemed like they were really comfortable with that.
All right. And then if we're looking at, NA, we look at, you've got United, you got Soar Gaming, you've got, Gabe, which is now Carbon 6, uh, got Allegiance. The other one that kinda really stands out for me as being kind of like a dark horse is Noble. Because Noble kinda showed that they can go toe to toe with the best, but they haven't been able to close out. If they can find a way to close out, I think they could be, they could surprise people going into this LAN.
The thing about Noble that is interesting going into the Gauntlet land is that if if Uzi, Stealth, Wubbin, and Wowie just like play their normal level, they'll be all right. The thing that going into land is really exciting for them is Chapo, when he gets fired up, can go absolutely awful in land. He's just such an emotional player. If he gets rolling, then he could easily start carrying games on land. And the other really important thing about Noble is that with Drelo as coach, he has a ton of land experience with picks and bans. He used to help Old Enemy, and he also same thing with Benji with Flashpoint and Denial last year. He's really, really good at picking up what the land meta is going to be and how teams seem to be playing and adapting to that. And it's very important that what teams practice going into land almost always changes by the end of the land. There's picks that people don't account for, or maybe a god that was being auto banned in scrims actually isn't that good, and then that starts getting let through, and you have to reevaluate where you prioritize that god. Stuff like that, Drelo is really good at picking up, and I think that with him and Chapo being on the team, if they're each of them are clicking on all cylinders with their teammates, then they have a lot of potential to take some games off other teams.
Right. And talking about the meta, is that something that you can kind of maybe predict beforehand, or is that something that is completely its own monster and beast and gets formed, in the thick of things at the LAN?
Well, you can definitely predict it, and you can definitely play a certain play style that you think is really strong. But the thing that always gets messed up is that going from scrims to SPL, like online SPL, everybody slows down their like pace of play a little bit. There's a lot less brawling. There's a lot more calculated fights. And then going into LAN, it's even more highlighted. Like everybody really, really tries to be more careful, and everything's a lot more calculated. Everybody's way more focused. And because of that, generally the game slows down a little bit. And teams that kind of recognize that and are able to adjust their picks for that will end up doing a lot better than teams who try to just like bash their face into invading every game. Like I think Noble last year was a good example of that in their group stage where they tried to just play all early game every game, and they had a game where Walrus was Osiris and soloed Scary D like twice and was like 8-0 or whatever he was. But then they couldn't shut down Barra, and he just carried the game and they lost anyways. Like stuff like that happens on land pretty consistently, so you have to make sure that you're accounting for that.
Do you think we'll see anything really interesting out of this LAN? Because I mean, looking back, like the last LAN, SWC, we had Eager come in and they completely shaped the pace, the style of the LAN with their decisions and the way that they started games. Do you think we'll see anything to that level and scale?
It doesn't seem like anybody has found stuff like that yet. I was experimenting with some stuff like that in PTS, and it seemed that every team always favored doing the non kind of janky or cheesy starts or whatever you want to call them. And to my knowledge, nobody has picked that type of stuff back up. Like I haven't heard of anybody running like a hog strat or something that's really going to surprise everybody. So I would think it'll be pretty standard to what you saw the rest of the online split, but you never really know because at this point it's going to be what 3 weeks since we've last seen the teams play each
Right.
other, so much can change.
Do you think we'll see a strong showing from like triple guardian comps? Because in the spring split, every time we kind of saw that break out, they were really, really strong.
I actually think that those comps will die out a little bit. They'll still be viable, but with Nemesis getting a buff and some other changes, Spear the Magus getting a buff as well, having 20 more protections at the max number of stacks, there's a lot of changes that have kind of tried to push people away from tankier gods. So if those changes actually were successful in the way Hyra's kind of wanted to go about that, then I think that you'll see a lot more carry style games. Like you'll see a lot more junglers carrying games, a lot more hunters carrying the games, and it won't be so many of these triple guardian comps just pressing W at you and killing everybody.
Going into this LAN, is Kernanos gonna be available?
I
Should
don't
be.
believe he is.
No?
I don't think so. I think he has to be available and ranked for at least like a week or two, and I don't think he is right now. I think the next LAN he might be available though, the Masters LAN.
Alright, so going into Masters, do you think Kernanos is gonna get played, A? And then B, do you think that Kernanos is an ADC, or is he possibly gonna get played in, like, a jungler role?
I think he'll definitely get played at the very least, just like the first day or so to try to test him out and see just how well he's performing. And then I definitely still think he's an ADC. I think any hunter, they just scale so much better out of the long lane than they do with going through the jungle because you get so much more farm when you're isolated like that. And you really want to get range carries like that, just as much farm as you possibly can. I think the interesting thing about Kernanos is that even though he's supposed to be like a late game, I guess like range carrier, or maybe he's like more mid game with how his kit is. I think he has really good rotational power because his dash goes pretty quickly. He can travel a good distance with that. And also because his clear is so good, I think he would be able to out rotate a lot of people and get off some pretty cool ganks with his ult and everything, which is why people maybe see him as a jungler. But I would still gear towards him being in ADC and fitting ADCs who really like to rotate a lot. People like Zap would kind of fit that role for me.
Yeah, I think he was probably a stronger jungler candidate when his
Before all
Briar
the nerfs, for
yeah, when
sure.
his Briar had the slow field, like, that was definitely when
Yeah.
he was probably at his highest to be a jungler, and without that, he kinda it takes away the zoning aspect of that ability, and it really I mean, it's still a very powerful gank tool if you can pull it off, but I feel like you kinda said it, he's gonna be a very aggressive, in your face ADC. He's a Zapman god. I mean, plain and
Yeah,
simple,
yeah.
he's a very Zapman-esque hunter.
I could definitely see Zap or Barra or whoever trying to pull him out and see how they do with it.
Alright, so the last team that I kinda wanna talk about, for in the Gauntlet is, the SPL Gatekeepers, now Oxygen Supremacy. Uh, a lot of people feel like they are an SPL team already. They've got a lot of talent.
Yeah, they are.
Do you
They
think
are definitely the
uh,
best amateur scene or team that has come out in a while, and I think that they will. I actually think if I had to bet on it, I bet that they would beat Flashpoint at land, and they could maybe even beat Noble. From my experience swimming that team,
mhm.
they have done really well against us. Even before we started to like start having our own issues, they were doing really well against United and Eager, from what I heard, who are other top three teams. I think that that team, if they don't choke on land, which is unfortunate to say, it's always an issue because you're always Skeely has had issues in the past where he loses a little bit of confidence and stuff like that. You also don't know how the rest of the team is going to perform at land. I think Veneno, for example, didn't have the strongest group stage under Allegiance last year. So there are some question marks there. Nirma also has not played on land, to my knowledge. So oh, and Data Remember was their ADC. He did actually play on LAN for the, I guess, to get the number one seed out of the challenger scene last year. But for the most part, they lack LAN experience outside of Kiki. So if they can get comfortable and they get to play their own game, I definitely could see them beating Flashpoint and maybe giving Noble a run for their money. It's hard to tell how far they could go, but they are definitely an SPL caliber team, in my opinion.
So do you think they could if everything goes right for them, they fire on all cylinders, do you think they could make it into the Smite Master?
I don't think they could make it in the Smite Masters once they start getting against some of the higher seeded teams. Specifically, teams like E United who have a ton of lane experience. I don't think I could see them beating those teams. Especially the main disadvantage they have is that even if they got on an insane run and they were playing really, really well, a team like E United, for example, would have had 5 sets worth of games to kind of study them and see what they want to play and prepare a draft plan for them. And that puts you at such a big disadvantage that I feel like that's just gonna eventually be too much to
Yeah,
overcome.
and I feel like E United is definitely one of those teams that you don't want that advantage in
Yeah,
their
100%.
favor. Yeah, because I mean, like you said, the experience and like they're gonna be very calculated. They're not gonna pull any punches. They're gonna go for it.
Yeah.
So E United, you know, I feel like they are definitely uh they're gonna perform better at the LAN than they did on the online stage. You know, rumbling around, looking at the Twitter, looking at subreddits, whatever, what have you, you kind of get the feeling that United, the players, Panda Cat in particular, have some issues with like some lag and some not having the best internet connection. Is that going to be, a difference maker? Are they going to have a better showing at the LAN stage purely because of that?
That's definitely a big factor. I would expect them to look much, much, much better on land than they did online. For that's one reason. Then just having more time with Benji is another reason. I think also going into land that I think it's harder for the public to kind of see is teams that are really, really close with each other and kind of get along really well. They end up doing super well on land because they're always around each other and they always like kind of get a feel for how each other wants to play. And anytime you have that type of synergy and you're getting along like that, it's really easy to kind of fire each other up in game. And I think, Payne's a person like that, Panda Cat as well, where they make a big play and they'll kind of yell and demoralize the other team. It also gets their teammates fired up. And because of that, I think they're just a really, really strong land team.
Well, I that is about time for us today. Uh, so I guess this is your moment. I will give you the soapbox to stand on. Anything you want to say? Any shout outs? The floor is yours to do whatever you want with.
Shout outs to my former teammates. I hope that they do well at the Gauntlet land. Shout outs to Team Allegiance. I guess I'm very grateful for the opportunity that they gave me to work with them. And I hope that we get to continue to work together and they are great peoples. And then shout outs to all of the people who have supported me and all the fans, all that good stuff. And shout outs to you for having me on.
Oh, thanks. All right, so uh, that's it for our show, guys. We are still on hiatus, but we are planning on doing a really, really big super show. Right now, we look to be having PolarBearMike's former teammate Weekend on the show. We look to be having Emilzy on the show. Looks like we might be getting Barra and Jeff on the show, and then we're trying to fill out another spot. So expect a big giant show coming up. And then we're possibly also going to get some stuff from Hi-Res, do a giveaway. So make sure you stay tuned, follow us on the Twitter, and really keep your ears open for announcements. So for Retake SPL, I'm LHS, and I will see you guys in the next video, I guess, because we're still on hiatus. So yeah. All right. See you guys.